Are you ready for this? The bill is the bull, the scriptor, the crypt of the Torah, Taurus, Tarot, Rotary, Turah. You pay for your bulls with bulls. Here's a bulletin. The Bible is the Bio Bull of El, the 12, the Lord of Light, the 12 o'clock position, the top of the tree, of the brain tree, the pineal gland. Jacob says in Genesis, I have seen God face to face, and his name is pineal, pine, L, the top of the spine, divine. Turn your head around. Look up and behind you and see the light. Become bright. Adjust your eyes to the light and become bright. Be right. Stop being wrong in the dim and dumb, with the rest of the cavemen chained to the wall of El. In hell, 6 o'clock, 6 o'clock. We will now continue reading from God by Deepak Chopra. The chapter on Saint Paul. I am the light of the world. Where was I? No, I'm saying that death comes to all. Have you considered how you will be judged? Did I go ahead there? Oh, good heavens, I'm having a stumbling brain fart here. Up the line, the guy with the missing egg. So the guy with the missing ear is, okay. Paul indicated that, okay. No, I'm saying that death comes to all. Have you considered how you will be judged? You should. You don't look like a man who lives carefully. Paul indicated the missing piece of ear. Usually he didn't preach in the middle of hard labor, but you never knew the right moment until the Lord showed it. On a mission to Philippi, Paul had been jailed with another missionary, Silas. They were marched into a deep dungeon where half the prisoners were insane or paralyzed from the isolation and darkness. Paul could feel Silas trembling as they lay back to back for protection, wrapped in filthy rags. Be strong, brother, Paul whispered. God sees us. He had a premonition. Just before dawn, the ground began to shake. Paul woke Silas and motioned toward the door. The second tremor would come in a few seconds, and Paul knew without thinking that it would be much stronger. The dungeon would erupt in terrified cries and a crush to smash down the door. God's timing had to be precise if his two missionaries were to survive. The second tremor came like thunder from the earth. The prison walls started to crack. They were like eggshells to the Lord, and glimpses of dawn could be seen among the falling debris. Silas sat up with a start, staring in confusion. Come, brother, said Paul, pulling him to his feet before Silas was awake enough to be terrified. The prisoners panicked as Paul foresaw, but he and Silas were now nearest the door when it fell off its hinges. They made it to the stairs as the earth roared. Thick dust stifled the dim light, and a swarm of bodies clawing their way up the stairs pulled the two Christians apart. Silas repeated God's name as he clung to the shaking walls, groping his way upward. At ground level, he spied a 3-foot fissure in the outer wall and slipped through. He bent over, coughing dust, his eyes running with tears. When he could see again, the scene filled Silas with awe. The earthquake hadn't torn the prison down, but made only the single crack that he had squeezed through. All around, the nearby buildings were still standing. The Romans in the barracks weren't even awake, until a solitary guard began to shout as escapees ran down the street, many half-naked and dragging their chains. Chained to the walls. To the wall. Silas called out Paul's name with one breath and praised God with the next. But as one prisoner after another squeezed through the crack, he couldn't spot him. There was no time to waste. The Roman garrison was alerted now. He could hear the clank of swords and tramping boots. The first soldiers on the scene made a wall of shields to push back the last stragglers coming out, and within minutes the opening was surrounded. What choice did he have? Silas ducked into a twisting narrow alley and ran. He was still young, and he ran a long way before the burning in his lungs forced him to stop. He didn't know the town, so he couldn't find the cluster of small houses where several Christians lived. Lost and alone, Silas tried to think of his wife back in Antioch. He slid to the ground from exhaustion, his back against a wall that was still cold from the night chill. Look at this. Does bread get any finer? Eat. Terror is good for the appetite. Even before he heard the voice, Silas had felt a man's shadow pass over him. He looked up. It was Paul, a glint in his eye and a round loaf of crusty bread in his hand. Don't worry, I didn't steal it. It's a gift from the jailkeeper. Silas was astonished. Who? Paul sank down and broke the bread in two. He muttered a short prayer and handed the larger half to Silas. I converted our jailer. Astonishment kept Silas from eating. During the earthquake? What better time? There was a miracle at hand. I couldn't just let it go to waste. Paul reached into the sack he wore at his waist. Not leaving out olives and cheese, which our sleepy jailkeeper had set out for his breakfast. Don't look so surprised. How many miracles do jailers see? He was impressed, and he offered this bread as a token. Paul ignored Silas's astonishment. It's good, isn't it? I should convert a few bakers. Silas pointed to a stray dog that was sniffing at them from a distance. It whined, testing to see whether they would throw him a scrap or kick him away. You'd convert him if you could, wouldn't you? Said Silas. Paul gave his companion a sidelong glance before deciding that this was a joke. Yes, he said curtly. He looks ready. Raising the next bite to his mouth, he noticed that his hand was trembling slightly. Paul felt immensely calm inside, but apparently his mortal body was stirred by the earthquake and God's intervention. Paul considered this incident with the converted jailer a great victory. He reported it to the church at Antioch, where the strongest believers lived. Strong or not, they would falter if he didn't regularly reinforce their faith with good news. Faraway Jerusalem was harder to persuade. There the Christians were as suspicious of Paul as an old rabbi in the provinces. Mistrust grew, no matter how many miracles he reported. Called before the assembled faithful in Jerusalem, Paul had to defend himself. His persecution of Christians as Saul was well remembered. For now, the Romans were lax about letting Christians assemble, and when Paul appeared, the torchlit hall was full. The elders, some of them styled as apostles, sat on a raised platform. Paul was reminded too clearly of judges' benches. If he was inclined to be nervous, he rose in a fit of anger. "I am not here to be looked down upon," he began. "Judge me as you wish. I have a calling no one here can challenge. If you speak against me, you speak against the mission I was given by Jesus." This was a brazen claim, and it caused such an uproar that he couldn't continue. "You never met Jesus!" a voice shouted. Half a dozen others took up the cry. "You never met Jesus!" Paul raised his hands to quiet their outrage. "I met Jesus in spirit. If you truly knew him, you would understand." The outcry against him doubled. His impudence was shocking. The leaders in Jerusalem had claimed sole authority since the crucifixion. Chiefly they were two: Peter, the preeminent disciple, the rock, petroleum, and Jesus' own brother James, also from Jacob, like Jack and John and Jane. Both were seated in the company, but neither showed any reaction. Paul raised his voice over the din. "How can you deny me? If you say that only you were with the Master of the true church, if you say that only you who are with the Master of the true church, it will die when you die. Is that what you want?" He didn't wait for a reply. "I know how you distrust me. I am a Roman citizen by birth, and the Romans hate us. I persecuted you myself, because your beliefs were beyond reason. Back in Rome, they don't understand a king who is not of this world. Neither did I. But you also know what happened to me when I saw the light." "What you say happened," an angry voice shouted. "So that's it," Paul shouted back. "The Lord calls me, but you have the right to sit over him. If I don't win your love, then God's love is cancelled." The murmuring quieted. Paul felt the slightest wave of sympathy. He had to play on it. "When he was teaching, anyone could set eyes upon Jesus," he said, "including the foolish eye, the ignorant eye, the lustful, vain, proud eye. I don't demean what you saw. You have a blessed eye because you saw the Lord incarnate. At the same time, don't demean what I saw." The disgruntled had quieted down completely. He was beginning to win them over. Paul knew that very few of them had the courage to think for themselves. They looked at Simon Peter to find out what he thought. The rock. With a faint gesture that brought total silence, Peter had something to say. "The Lord's blessing falls on everyone, like the rain. Didn't our Master say so? Then how would you separate the worthy from the unworthy?" It was an ambiguous utterance, and Paul faced it head on. "The man I once was, Saul of Tarsus, would be unworthy if he were standing here. By the grace of the Lord, he is dead. I had a second birth." Grumbling arose. He had gone a step too far. The brothers were tired of hearing about Paul's miracle story, how Saul, the zealous persecutor of Christians, had been struck from his horse while riding from Jerusalem to Damascus, how the light of Christ blinded him for 3 days, until it was restored by a gentle brother, Ananias. Paul repeated it in every sermon, before Jews and Gentiles. Some people call that vanity.